parties. Venezuela's different political parties are closing their election campaigns this Wednesday ahead of Sunday's regional and municipal polls. Trade unionists and social movements protested against the government of Jair Bolsonaro in the Brazilian capital as part of events to mark Black Consciousness Month. Israel launched a missile attack against the Syrian capital Damascus from the occupied Golan Heights. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. In Venezuela, campaigns are drawing to a close in several regions ahead of Sunday's elections. The candidates of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela and the Great Patriotic Pole Alliance held rallies in municipalities in the western state of Zulia. Party members and supporters expressed their support for the re-election of the current state governor as well as the mayors. Political leaders recalled that in their opinion, these elections not only provide an opportunity to measure themselves against their political opponents, but also to reject the U.S. sanctions imposed on the country. Likewise, the candidates of the opposition parties in the western state of Zulia rallied with their supporters in the city of Maracaibo. They called on their members to exercise the right to vote and assured that the process is very simple to follow. As part of the closing events of their campaigns, candidates highlighted their commitment and willingness to work to improve public services. And the president of Venezuela's National Electoral Council, Pedro Calzadilla, met with the country's diplomatic corps prior to the regional and municipal elections of this Sunday, November 21st. During the meeting, the electoral official reiterated the democratic environment of the broad political participation of this electoral process.
Most of the political parties have candidates aspiring to the different positions, a political atmosphere of calm and peace. You live here and you have seen this. Rallies, electoral campaign events, as happens everywhere. Political meetings, as occurs in republics, in places where democracy is the guide that organizes and structures life.
And the president of the Venezuelan Electoral Authority also assured that everything is ready and set for Sunday's elections, which will demonstrate the unshakable will of the Venezuelan people to live in peace and democracy.
The table is set, everything is ready, everything is in place, just hours away from the election. We want to tell you, your governments, your countries, the peoples you represent, that life in democracy, life in peace, is reaffirmed in Venezuela.
In Venezuela, the deployment of international guests accompanying the electoral process ahead of Sunday's regional elections is advancing well. The Venezuelan Foreign Ministry announced that the international guests will tour polling stations across the country to monitor the development of the electoral process, in which more than 70,000 candidates are standing. In addition, a delegation of 34 observers from the European Union and a group of electoral officials from Belize arrived in the South American country this week to observe the entire process. More than 21 million Venezuelans are registered to vote for 23 state governors and 335 mayors. In Bolivia, a meeting of social movements in defense of democracy was held, while the government of President Luis Arce assesses the damage to the economy caused by strikes and protests promoted by far-right opposition sectors. The massive event, held on the highway that connects El Alto and La Paz, saw the participation of multiple social sectors, led by the Bolivian Workers' Confederation. During the day, activists committed themselves to defending the country's governability in the midst of attempts at destabilization promoted by the far right and condemned by the majority of the population. Meanwhile, the government is assessing the damages caused by the strike promoted by the sector of the opposition, a move which has been denounced as part of a renewed strategy to oust the current government of President Luis Arce Catacora. Authorities of Bolivia's Ministry of Public Works, Services and Housing denounced that the strike promoted by the opposition sectors caused heavy losses in the air and land transportation. Minister Edgar Montaño informed that the total losses in the institutions attached to the ministry alone exceeded $2 million. He also pointed out that the loss of these economic resources has a direct impact on the social programs promoted by the government for students, pregnant women, and the senior citizens. The minister emphasized that the opposition's demands to repeal Law 1386 was only an excuse to commit acts seeking to destabilize the country. Following the repeal of the law, the same sectors have changed their demands and are calling for the release of the supposed political prisoners, among them the former de facto and coup-plotting president Yanin Áñez. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In Brazil, trade unionists and social movements protested against the government of Jair Bolsonaro in the capital Brasilia as part of events to mark Black Consciousness Month. Mobilizations, community activities, educational and cultural events are being held throughout November, ahead of the nationwide observance of Black Consciousness Day on November 20th. The event seeks to recognize Black history and cultural awareness in a country where racism remains deeply entrenched and has been further fueled by far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, as well as remembering the victims of the COVID-19 pandemic and paying tribute to murdered Afro-Brazilian councilwoman Marielle Franco. Protesters have centered on the Out with Racist Bolsonaro theme.
The week of Blackness Consciousness comes with the theme Out with Racist Bolsonaro. We want to say that we brought Zumbi dos Palmares this week, and Marielle to say that all our ancestry of Black people, who are the majority in this country, is alive, is resisting, and will overthrow any fascist government. Many Black women in Brazil joined this week the movement for Bolsonaro, with the women's movement, with the LGBT movement, because we understand that Brazil, with its large Black majority, cannot accept the structural racism that happens in Brazil.
Now we continue in South America. The Argentine Front for All Coalition celebrated this Wednesday the Day of the Peronist Militancy, an annual event during which political organizations, social movements and trade unions remembered the 1972 return to the country of the leader Juan Domingo Perón after 18 years of exile. This year's celebrations came just 3 days after the legislative elections. The date saw a rally in the symbolic Plaza de Mayo, where President Alberto Fernández addressed supporters and called for unity among progressive forces. The event, promoted by the General Confederation of Labor, was also accompanied by different social and labor movements and the human rights organizations. Fernández told the packed square, "Today is an important day for us to start the second stage of our government," and took the opportunity to thank all those who worked to secure results in last Sunday's elections. This Friday, November 19th, the Colombian Institutional Court is set to rule on the decriminalization of abortion. The vote in the Constitutional Court comes following a powerful campaign led by the Causa Justa, or Just Cause, feminist movement, which filed a lawsuit to remove abortion from the country's criminal code. 9 magistrates have been analyzing the legislation since last month, while 114 technical papers have been presented by experts in health, criminal law, and freedom of conscience. The current Penal Code sees penalties of 1 to 3 years in prison for women who voluntarily terminate their pregnancies, with abortion only legal in cases of rape or incest, inviolability of the fetus, or risk to the mother's life or health. Now we address other topics. The World Health Organization has warned that coronavirus deaths and fatalities, of course, increased by 5% in the last week in Europe, making it the only region where COVID-19 fatalities are on the rise. The UN Health Agency reported that of a total of 3.3 million new infections reported, 2.1 million came from Europe, while the highest numbers of new cases were in Russia, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, deaths jumped by 67% in Norway and by 38% in Slovakia. The WHO describes Europe as the new epicenter of the ongoing pandemic and warns of more fatalities to come if urgent actions aren't taken on the continent. Austria has imposed strict restrictions on movement, while the Netherlands and some others have reintroduced lockdown measures. The United Kingdom, meanwhile, decided to roll out booster shots to everyone aged over 40. And Belgium tightened its coronavirus restrictions on Wednesday, mandating wider use of face masks and enforcing work from home as cases spike in the country's fourth COVID-19 wave. From Saturday, all people in indoor venues, such as cafes and restaurants, will need to wear a mask unless seated. Nightclubs might have to test their guests if they want to let them dance mask-free. People wanting to eat in a restaurant or go to a theater already have to present a COVID pass, showing vaccination, a negative test, or recent recovery. Most Belgians will also have to work from home 4 days a week until mid-December. According to the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, Belgium has one of the highest cases per capita rates in the European Union, at around 100 per over the past 14 days.
Fortunately, we have vaccines. Fortunately, 9 out of 10 adults in our country are vaccinated. And it's thanks to your efforts, it's thanks to the effort of all those who have been vaccinated that today we're not in lockdown. It is because of you that life can go on. That there is frustration and disappointment, I understand that. We hope that the fall would have been lighter and that we would have had a winter without COVID. I know that many people are tired, especially those who work in care, who are once again submerged by the pandemic.
And Sweden will introduce a COVID-19 vaccination pass on December 1st for public indoor events and for more than 100 people as cases rise in much of Europe.
The Health Agency now sees a need to take further measures to prevent unvaccinated people from congregating in large groups. It wants public gathering and public indoors events of more than 100 people to be restricted. If vaccination certificates are used, the restrictions should not apply.
On Wednesday, the Philippines received another shipment of over 3.5 million doses of China's coronavac shots. The vaccines were purchased through the Asian Development Bank and were received at the Manila International Airport by China's ambassador to the Philippines, Wang Zilian, as well as Carlito Galvez, the chief implementer of the Philippines COVID-19 National Task Force. The shipment was couriered by Philippine Airlines. The country's Food and Drug Administration has approved the use of China's Sinovac vaccine as booster shots against COVID-19. China has continuously provided vaccines to the Philippines since the first delivery of February 28th.
I could vividly remember that the president is very, very happy seeing the Chinese aircraft, government aircraft, military aircraft, with their servicemen pushing the life-saving vaccines that will greatly give so much hope to our people.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Israel launched 2 missiles against the south of the Syrian capital Damascus in the latest attack against the country. The missiles were launched from the occupied Syrian Golan Heights against the southern area of Damascus, according to Syrian news agency Zana. The two missiles were fired in the early hours of Wednesday morning and targeted an empty building, which was hit by one missile, while the other was intercepted and shot down by the Syrian army's air defense system before hitting its target. The Israeli air offensive did not cause any major damage nor casualties. Israel has launched regular attacks against Syria from the occupied territory of the Golan Heights, with an escalation in the attacks as the Syrian government advances in eliminating Western-backed terrorist groups from its territory. An Israeli military court on Wednesday sentenced a Spanish aid worker to 13 months in prison after convicting her of illegally funding a Palestinian militant group. The move comes as the Israeli regime bans human rights organizations linked to Palestine. Spanish aid worker Juana Rashwami had been working for the Union of Health Work Committees, which Israel banned from the West Bank in 2020, claiming it was a civilian arm of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a revolutionary Palestinian organization the Zionist regime describes as a terrorist organization. Her sentencing comes weeks after Israel outlawed 6 prominent Palestinian civil society groups, alleging there were also fronts for the PFLP. The groups are the MER, Al-Haq, Byzant Center for Research and Development, Defense for Children International Palestine, the Union of Agricultural Work Committees, and the Union of Palestinian Women's Committees all deny the allegations. European donors who support the banned groups and the United Nations have asked to see concrete evidence from Israel supporting the ban.
The only thing she has said is that she was a worker of the Health Work Committees, an organization that was banned by Israel. Regarding the funding, funds were brought for health programs. If any diversion happened, she, of course, wasn't aware of it. How is it possible to lie in public about something that came from the court? That wasn't so. Manipulate and defame the reputation of someone, and moreover, to try and justify the criminalization of human rights organizations by using someone else. A different case. It seems pretty vile to me.
Now we move on to other topics. In Sudan, several anti-coup protesters were reported to have been killed by security forces as thousands rallied this Wednesday in the cities of Omdurman and Bari. The protests come in response to the military's seizure of power on October 25th. Thousands of people took to the streets on Wednesday as security forces were deployed in the capital, Khartoum. According to reports, live bullets and tear gas were fired to disperse demonstrators, while mobile phone communications were cut off earlier in the day. The latest fatalities take the death toll in the anti-coup protests to 38, while thousands have been wounded. Protesters are demanding a full handover to civilian rule and for the coup leaders to be tried in court. The international community has condemned the military takeover and canceled aid to the country, while demanding a swift return to civilian rule. Tens of thousands of people protest in Athens on Wednesday to mark the anniversary of the 1973 student revolt against a U.S.-backed junta, an annual event that often sparks violence. 24 people were killed at the Athens Polytechnic in 1973 when the junta sent troops and police against a pro-democracy student uprising. 20,000 turned out in the capital Athens, according to police. However, the demonstration remained peaceful into the evening. Most of the marchers were students, unionists, and members of the leftist parties. In Athens, thousands marched to the U.S. Embassy to protest against Washington's support for the Greek military dictatorship during the Cold War. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.